The second series of photographs that came out of this travel, this journey, this research, I title Sagaland. So these are landscapes that were figured in the sagas, but a lot of them are also archaeological sites. So there is this play between the legitimacy of the sagas in actually detailing specific geographical locations for archaeologists to go and do their excavations. So the first one, this is in Denmark, and it's a very, very large grave field. And many of the stones that you see here, it looks quite chaotic, but many of them are also in the shapes of boats or rings. This is an extremely well-preserved farmstead in the Faroe Islands. And you'll also note that in this series, I'm deliberately trying to juxtapose the historic architecture with the contemporary. And this is an excavation of a village in Norway called Kaupang, just south of Oslo. So what we see in the foreground are excavations of graves. Again, the graves are in the shape of little boats. And then here I come to the story of Erik the Red, who I mentioned earlier. So Erik the Red what's important to me about him is that people actually have heard of him. And so it becomes a little bit of an anchor point for the story. And so I visited his homestead in Iceland, so the last farm where he lived before he was exiled. And eventually you'll see in this project, it takes me to the farm that he establishes in Greenland. And a really important Viking Age site is actually along the Continental Rift in Iceland. It's called Thingvellir, and it's where the Vikings established their parliament. So they actually had quite a sophisticated law system for their time, and because they were independent of a monarchy, they established their own Commonwealth society with rules and laws. So a lot of what we know about, or we have heard about the Vikings and the violence that they perpetuated, surely a lot of that is true, but they also dealt with things in a very reasonable way. And I thought it was very interesting how they had chosen this continental rift, which is what separates the American tectonic plate from the European tectonic plate. So this whole time they were sort of living on the edge of a new world. And this is another saga site, Berserkjagata, that tells of a story of a farmer who wanted to build a trail through this lava field. So he hired two Swedish berserkers. So these were these big, strong men, mythological people from the sagas, that maybe there's some truth to their psychotic state. But he hired them to build this path through his lava field, and in exchange, one of them would marry his daughter. But after they built the trail, instead of giving away his daughter, he murdered them. And so what we see there in the foreground could be their grave. So there are a lot of stories attached to these images, which is why eventually it might be logical to publish this as a book. I also photographed some of the reconstructions, archaeological reconstructions that have been done, obviously without any kind of photographic material to refer to. So there's a lot of interpretation that goes into these reconstructions. And this series is quite large, so I didn't want to take too much time. So there's many, many other landscapes that sort of trace this journey from Sweden all across North America, heading towards the New World. So if we look at the map here, so far I've shown you images that were taken in Gotland and Denmark and Norway. But there was one place that was always very elusive to me, and that was Greenland. So, I mean, the main reason is because it's very difficult to get to, and it costs a lot of money. So, and that's another reason why some of my projects, they take a long time to do. There's this There's the element of research, trying to gather information, make contacts, and of course be able to raise the money, write grant applications. And so my work sort of depends on the support as well. And then finally I was given the opportunity to go and photograph in Greenland. So that's bringing me to the work that we see in the exhibition here, which was all photographed in Greenland, as well as the video. I will go back to this. There are 3 locations marked on the map. 2 villages and 1 site. So Kassiarsuk, Igaliku, and Valsi are the 3 places that I wanted to photograph and where I wanted to film. And these are near Kakortak, which I'm not sure I pronounced properly, but it's quite in the south of Greenland, not close to the capital at all. And there is a small text that I wrote for the exhibition that you'll find on the plinth over there. But I tell it as if it's like about my own journey there. And so the first site that was of interest to me was to visit the site of Erik the Red's farm, so the new colony in the New World. And so this is it. It's located on the fjord that separates Narsarsuaq Airport from the village of Kassiarsuk. And when Erik the Red colonized, it was called Brattahlid. When the Norse came to Greenland, they came with approximately 25 ships. That's what the stories tell. We think that only maybe 20 ships made it there. More ships came afterwards. They had quite a healthy population for a couple of hundred years, both in what they called the eastern and western settlements, which were more to the south and to the north. And in around the year 1400, that population dwindled until eventually the Norse actually disappeared. So there's been a lot of questions about what happened to the Norse colony, why they disappeared, did they die, was there conflict, did they simply go back home? And really, I think archaeologists agree that the answer is a little bit of all of these things. So there was a change in climate that made it much colder and difficult for them to survive there. They were more and more isolated from the rest of their people in Europe. Aging population, always a problem. The young people wanted to go back to Iceland and be closer to their community. And the idea of conflict is still unanswered. There isn't a lot of evidence that shows there was a conflict between the Inuit population at that particular time when they disappeared. They actually think that the Inuits were further north and they came to South Greenland a few hundred years later. So getting back to Erik the Red settlement, they believe, they have strong evidence, but it's not completely established that this was his farm, but it's a logical location. And this photograph here shows the ruins of maybe an older dwelling, something that was built after the time of Erik the Red, next to a cafe. So this cafe is for the tourists that come from the Narsarsuaq airport, and they might come to Kassiarsuk or Brattahlid for a day and get a tour of the site, as we see in this photograph here. And so some of my photographs of Kassiarsuk, they focus on the traces of the ruins there, how they're presented to tourists today, and also this relationship with the church. So an interesting coincidence about the Viking Age is that in the year 1000, the Vikings of Iceland adopted Christianity at their national assembly. It became law that they would become Christians. And that was also the same year that they presumably discovered the New World. A lot of people will say it's Christianity that ended the Viking Age because the culture changed, it adapted. And they had different morals and a way of life. So churches appear quite frequently in some of these images in the New World, in all the different villages that. And on the image on the left, what we see now is the present-day chapel in Kassiarsuk, and just in front of it, there's a subtle trace, and that is presumably the first church that was ever built in Greenland, which was commissioned by Erik the Red's wife. So before going on this trip, I knew that I wanted to start to work in video. And I thought that to work in video, it would be nice to have some people in front of the camera. So I started contacting different archaeologists in Denmark, in Greenland, some contacts that I knew here in Canada, to find out who was going to be doing some restoration or archaeological projects in Greenland in the summer of 2013. And I was eventually put in touch with Jörg Nygaard from the National Museum in Nuuk, who is Danish, and was going to be doing some restoration work in Igaliku and in the Valsey site. And so they were very excited about the project right away and eager to collaborate with me and be in front of the camera. And so here we see these are photographic stills, so they're, this image here you see outside the gallery if you come during the daytime. But these are also scenes that appear in the video. And so what we see in the video is that we see them working, but the type of work that they're doing is quite ambiguous. And to be honest, it's ambiguous in person as well, not just in the video. What remains of these ruins in Greenland are archways. There are a few standing dwellings, which you will see, but most of these buildings, which would have been houses or churches or barns, and there were many of them built with stone, a lot of them have disappeared. And so their restoration project is to just pick up things that have fallen and try to put it back up. Make sure that what is left there remains standing, so both for the safety of the community, and there are a lot of children, as you also see in the video, that play on the ruins. It's literally their playground. And also for tourists to come and appreciate this history. So the image on the right is, they're not actually restoring a ruin there, but it is a plaque that was brought on site that marks the grave of presumably the last bishop who lived in Greenland. So Igaliku was also where the bishop lived from about the year maybe 1100 to the last bishop around 1400. And something else interesting that I learned there that I wanted to include in the work was the way that these stones had been reappropriated over time. So when the Vikings first colonized Greenland, they took their stones from the mountains in order to build their churches and their homes and their barns. And so they didn't use mortar. It's all stones that were either naturally cut, or they would cut them by throwing them and then they would place it. And then when the Norse disappeared, and a few hundred years later, these sites were recolonized again by Danes and Norwegians. Instead of going into the mountains and taking the rocks and building their own houses, they took the stones from the ruins. And so some of the buildings that we see there today that are made of stone are probably built from these ruins. We don't know for sure. So the present day church, or we see this house, it obviously has a vinyl siding extension on it, but the original part is also made out of these red stones. And what's also interesting now is that these archaeologists are coming today. This practice, of course, is not being done anymore because there's been preservation laws about not borrowing, taking rocks from ruins and so on. But the archaeologists today are now trying to put those rocks back onto the ruins. So from the site at Igaliku, we traveled as a group. So the group would have been 3 archaeologists, myself, my cameraman, and my sound person, who's my partner, also an artist, Andreas Rakauskas. And we traveled to the Valsey site, which is, there's an archaeological site there, but there's nothing else. For about 20 kilometers, there's no village or town. And so we were camping. And this makes for difficult conditions to make a media art project, such as video. Having to charge, being able to charge batteries is not possible. So really the whole thing also became a living experience. So there we again documented the process of these archaeologists and their relationship to not only the stone but the technology that they had to use. All of it is quite low tech, but as you see in this photograph, they did need the muscle power or the machine power of a small excavator, which they had brought in by boat.